Welcome back to the channel, and in today's video we're going to cover the work that I did to prep this hull for the new stringers. Alright guys, if you haven't seen my other videos, I'll give you a real quick recap of what we have going on here. So we got my 1979 Centurion jet boat, and real long story short, I found that I had a rotten stringer by a series of engine failures. Essentially what I had is the stringers were rotted out, which allowed my engine to be shifted off at a bad angle, which then put my U-joints on the PTO shaft to the pump out of place, and they were loading the crankshaft with forward thrust, wiping out my thrust bearings. I've gone ahead and I initially was going into this repair thinking I was just going to go ahead and replace the stringers. Once we got into it, I found that on the back, the transom was pretty rotted, so I've decided to replace all the wood in the boat. Now the next steps that I need to do is there's a little bit of rework I want to do to the transom, and I need to go ahead and finish prepping the rest of the glass for the stringers. Before I get to that though, I want to finalize this transom, and there's a few things I want to show you up close that need to be addressed and how I plan to take care of them. We're back in the boat looking at the transom, and there's basically three things that I need to address before I can start moving forward and putting the wood on. The first one, which I mentioned in my last video, is if you look carefully, the fiberglass and gel coat's separating right here. So I'm going to go ahead and attempt to fix that with either a epoxy resin or fiberglass resin, and see if I can't squeeze it in there with a syringe and clamp this together and seal it tight. Now, I figure that's the best case scenario for a fix, and if it doesn't work, I'm no worse off than I am now. I don't want to get into any gel coat repair or fiberglass repair, and I have the added benefit of the pump cover housing, which kind of helps bolt it on and clamp it in there when it's fixed. So I need to go ahead and address that. One of the other things I need to address is you can see back here in this corner, there's two problems with it. One of them, the boat took a bit of a hit on the backside, so there's a small pinhole right there. And the bigger problem is this is below the level of where the transom wood would sit, and it leaves a void. So I'm assuming that void was there, and that's why when the boat took that hit, it was a weak spot and has that little hole. So I'm gonna go ahead and fix that hole and fill that void up so it's level at the surface. That way, when I go ahead and bring my transom wood down and over this level, I have more strength and I don't have any cavities back there. The third and final thing I need to address before I go ahead and start working towards getting the transom wood in is right back here on the keel at the back of the pump. And you can see it has these cracks on it, and you can also see just how thin it is. At some point in the past, somebody has ground down and reshaped the bottom of the keel behind the pump because they were doing something weird. But these cracks aren't going to work. I need more strength here, more thickness. So I'm going to grind this down as much as I can without going through. I'm going to re-glass this up and build it up. I'll be pretty aggressive with it, so that way if I need to reshape on the other side I can. Once I have my intake back in, I will go ahead and dress the bottom side, either reshaping it as needed or adding more glass to finish the repair. Because this boat, when I had it, did not have a shoe or ride plate, and I went ahead and sent my intake off to have it machined for one. So I'm gonna wait on the bottom side until I have that intake back to see how the shoe and ride plate affect the shape of the hole and what I need to do back there. But before I go ahead and put the intake back on, I'm really gonna rework this and make sure it's safe for the future. If you're enjoying this jet boat rebuild and you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. I really appreciate it. It helps me out a lot. For those of you that have already subscribed, you've been commenting, liking the videos, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate the nice comments. It means a lot to me. Keep them coming. Let's get back to the boat. Okay, so I got the gel coat and the fiberglass epoxy back together, and you can see that it's one piece and doing well. Now, I chose to use epoxy and not fiberglass resin. Mainly that's because the epoxy that I had was a little bit more viscous than resin, and it would help spread in there better at the syringe. What I used was G-Flex from West Marine, and that's also what I'm going to be using to epoxy on the wood for the back of the transom. You can see I also got some 1708 laid down and reinforced on the keel there. I didn't want to build up any more because I will be reinforcing further after the wood goes in with my tabbing. So I've done that and I'll let that sit. I still have a lot more work to do on the back here on the transition from the transom to the keel, where there was, you can see the evidence of a dry layup on their old tabbing, and I need to continue grinding that down. So I'll be smoothing all that out before I really get into the tabbing and the transom. Lastly, you can see I use fiberglass structural repair putty in the corners to go ahead and level everything out and get rid of the voids and cavities. Again, allowing me to bring the wood over and have a better bond and more strength back there with the transom. So that brings me back to the project of grinding, making dust, the thing I've been avoiding. And as I mentioned in the last video, I had a new tool that I was going to purchase to try to make this job easier. So is what I have been using up until this point is this combination of 4.5-inch grinder, 5-inch air grinder, and these smaller die grinders. Everything here has a 24 grit disc, and it's incredibly hard to get a good flat grind with these, primarily because you're usually running on only one part of the surface, and it gives you like a circular pattern, and everything you do just gets wavy. So I've been eyeballing this Contour SCT because, as I mentioned, this car is getting stripped down and painted after I'm done with the boat, and this tool is great for that, so it had some appeal to me. But this big width of this disc, I figure that's gonna be great for running it down to get rid of this tabbing, so that way I don't have the problem with the radial marks and getting divots and waves. I should be able to just go ahead and grind this, hopefully run it down in one shot and get a nice smooth pattern on it. Right here also, this is just chock full of really rough mat that someone put in, so I need to smooth out all of that in here so I can get a nice layup. So I'm hoping that SCT is gonna go ahead and make this job a lot quicker and a lot easier with a much better end result. So before I go ahead and get to grinding the glass out of the boat, I need to go ahead and drop down all my plastic, get my fan set up, and get masked up and start tearing into it. So I took a break from grinding and I wanted to show you what I was dealing with on the center with this mat. When they put this on, I mean, you can see how bad of a job they did, but I found that there's a lot of air pockets on it. There's a lot of pore adhesion, just everything's a real big mess. So unfortunately I have to go through and grind it all up, which is quite a bit of work. I did try to chisel a lot of it out, and you can see it wasn't working that great, so I have more control with the grinding on the depth and not getting into the glass underneath, so that's why I've chosen to grind it down. And you can see up here in the corner how it wasn't even sitting flat in the corner and it just has this big gap. So I got most of it down here. The Contour tool from Eastwood, it does pretty good, except I only have a 60 grit disc right now. The rougher grit discs, like 40 grit discs, are on back order. But it does do a really good job of keeping everything level and smooth. So is what I found that works best with the tools I have right now is to go ahead and hit it with my grinders, the 24 grit, and I can grind it down, and you can see like right here where you can get back to the glass, and then all this is just pretty much resin and a little bit of mat left up there. So it's pretty easy to go and stop when I get to the parent material and just move on. And then I come back with the Contour and go over it all, and it smooths it out and levels it, and it's working pretty good. This side I haven't gone on at all, and up here I need to go back. I'll probably take my 3-inch die grinder and I'll get rid of these spots here and blend them in, blend it in the other direction. and I'll need to do the same up here for this tabbing. So more grinding. I still have to do everything under the bow. A lot of work ahead of me, but only one way to get through it, and that's just to get after it. If you guys couldn't tell, I've been grinding on this for quite a while. It is quite a bit of work to get everything ground out on this boat, and unfortunately the person that was here before me did not make it any easier. So I would say I'm probably 80% of the way there on the grinding. I stopped now because there is some spots that I need to do some glass work on, and then I know I'll have to do a little bit of grinding over that. So I stopped at the 80% point. I'll do a little bit of glass work, which we'll discuss here in a second, and then I'll finish the rest of the grinding, and then we can finally move forward. Well, I wanted to talk about why this grinding's taken me so long. And if I were just doing the grinding on the removal of the stringers, it really wouldn't have been that bad. But as I mentioned earlier and in the previous videos, the center support that holds the floor up that runs down the keel, it was pretty ragged the way it was installed. And what I think they did is I think they actually laid down fiberglass mat, laid the board down, and just poured resin on top of it. There's some areas where the resin was 1/4 inch plus thick with no mat to it at all, where you could see that the resin just actually pooled up underneath the board and just sat there. So essentially, all the way across the dead center here, all the way up to the front, I've had to grind that all down. Not only was it just saturated and resin heavy in the mat, there was a lot of air pockets in the layup. As I was grinding through, you could see that the air pockets were there and how it wasn't really adhered to the parent material of the boat, and I wasn't really comfortable leaving that there. So I was just trying to go ahead and get it ground down back to the parent material the best I could. So the contour that I purchased that I was talking about, when I ordered it, the coarsest grit that I could get for this wheel was a 60 grit. All the coarser grits like 40, and the grinding discs that they had were all on back order, and I'm still waiting on those. So it's hard to judge its effectiveness on this job. The 60 grit's a little fine, but is what I found that it did do really good is after I would go through and grind down where the stringers were with my 5-inch grinder, I could go ahead and run it down the plane of the stringers, and it really did a great job of getting everything smoothed out and leveled and on the same plane. So I think it would be a lot more effective if I had the 40 grit discs on it, and also if I didn't have to grind out the whole center of this keel from the people before me. I think it would have been a much better tool for the job. If I was only dealing with the length here for the stringers and that prep, I would have been done quite a while ago, and it worked great for that. The center, not so much. You can see here where I had those water pickups that were in the boat that I removed. I already have those holes glassed up. Now, I only did this from the top for now, and same thing for the keel section behind the pump when I repaired that. I did both of those sections only from the top. That's because the boat's so low to the ground right now that I don't really have much room to work underneath the boat. So like for these holes here, I just put some masking tape over the hole, and then I beveled out the hole, and it ended up taking 8 layers of 1708 to get it back to the same height as the parent material here, and that's the complete thickness of the boat. Once I'm done with all this fiberglass work, I'm going to go ahead and raise the boat up higher. I'll bevel these out from the bottom. The same thing back there on the keel. and I'll build them up and repair them properly on both sides, re-gel coat it. So this is only the first step of that repair. You can see that this whole area where the holes were and where the glasswork went into the area where the stringer will sit. That's why I went ahead and did this now. I took care of this hole, got it all patched up from the top, and now I can go ahead and continue when I'm finishing the last of the prep for the boat and get this surface prepped so that way I can bed the stringers in and tap them in over it. And back here, the same thing as well. I previously mentioned that a lot of the layup back here was pretty dry, so I ended up going and grinding as much of that out as I could while still feeling comfortable with not removing too much material. So as what I've done, I've already started on this piece as I went, and I've already started to build that back up with 1708, so that way it's on the same plane as this existing material here. You can see in this area back here, in this area where I've ground out, it's quite a bit lower than this area up here. So I'm going to go ahead and use 1708 just like I did here and get this built up to be at the same plane as this forward section of the boat. And the reason why I'm doing that now is because I want the thickness to be all the way up against the back of the fiberglass of the boat, so the wood for the transom is sitting on top of that. If I either do it now and then build that up after the wood is in, this area would be a lot thinner than I want. So I need to go ahead and finish those areas there, build those up. I'm going to do a little bit more reinforcing around the hole here for the pump, and there's a few smaller low areas that I'm going to go ahead and fill up and try to get at the same height. And once I have this glasswork done, I'm going to go ahead and do the one last push on the grinding and prep. And at that point, we'll be going ahead and getting the wood ready to go back in the boat. All right guys, that was a lot of grinding, but we finally made it through it and I got the whole of the boat prepped. So let's take a minute and talk about that. Like I mentioned earlier, we had the big mess in the center with all the mat, so that's finally all cleaned up. It's pretty much down to the parent glass of the boat and it's nice, smooth, level surface. I'm happy with that and I'm content to go ahead and build up on top of that surface and start reconstructing the boat. The sides of the stringers, those are again taken care of, good, smooth, flat. I can work off of it, getting ready to build up and get the boat reassembled. You can see the holes where the water pickups were, they're filled, they're sanded down, and now they're flush with the top surface of the boat from the inside. You can see now with the proximity of where the stringers are going to sit, the tabbing is going to go over them, so that's why I went ahead and did that now. Now again, I did not do anything on the bottom. I used blue painter's tape just to go ahead and keep the glass level with the bottom of the boat. And I did all the fiberglass repair work from the top side only. And like I mentioned, once I'm done with all the work on the top side of the boat, I'm going to go ahead and raise it up higher on the jack stands, and I'll be able to have some working room underneath to grind out those, bevel them back in, and do the exact same repair that I did on the top side. Back here you can see where I did quite a bit of work where that dry tabbing was, so I went and ground out that tabbing as much as I was comfortable with, and then I laid some more 1708 and built it back up. I also built up a little bit around the back of the pump, and I did a lot of this because the back of my boat has a little bit of a hook in the bottom of the hull, and the way this glass was ran, it wasn't flat all the way across or straight. So I did that to build it up to be straight on the same surface. Now that doesn't address anything with the hook that I have on the hull. May choose to address that later or not, but I wanted to be sure that the inside of the boat is good, it's straight, and I wanted all this prep done before the transom went in, because it allowed me to run all these repairs up to fiberglass of the boat, and the transom will sit over it. Before we end this video, guys, I wanted to take a minute and talk about the grinders and all the tools that I use to work on the prep of this boat. And it seemed like as the project went on, I ended up grabbing every tool that I owned that could remove fiberglass. I think I was hoping that I'd find the one magical tool that worked better than the rest, but in reality, it just is a lot of hard work and labor, and none of these tools really made it easier than the others. But I'm gonna go through and talk about the ones that I had, which ones I felt worked better, and for you, if you're gonna do this job, which ones I feel are essential. So we'll start with this contour. Like I mentioned early on, I had high hopes for it, and when I first got it, I only had this 60 grit sanding disc, which overall did not work that great. I ordered this 40 grit stripping disc with it, and it was on back order, and towards the tail end of my repairs, this finally did come in, and I was able to try it out, and I'd say this was pretty successful on getting the hole ground down, removing good material, but keeping it smooth. Also, I did get this wire wheel, which I found worked really good for getting off the old glue, which I addressed much earlier in my series of videos. But overall, if you're going to be in a situation like I am where you're going to be painting another car and using it for what it's intended, it's probably worth it, and that's why I have it. But for this project, don't worry about it. Right here is my 7-inch Makita polisher, and this tool came in real handy because I can slow the speed down. This 4.5-inch grinder is good and removes a lot of material, but you have very little control. You get a lot of radial marks, you get a lot of, it's easy and for this to get away from you and leave a lot of divots. This I can slow the speed down, which helps control how aggressive it is on the grinding, but also bigger surface area and got a lot more work done. So this actually was one of the main tools I used. This is not the ideal disc on this grinder, this 24 grit flap wheel. I would have much preferred to have just a 24 grit sanding disc as I do on this air grinder, and that would have allowed a much more surface area, so that way I could have had a much smoother grind, and with the ability to slow the speed down on this would be a top tool to do the job. Again, this grinder was very helpful. It moved a lot of material, but you got to be real careful because it just spins too fast on the glass, and you have not a lot of control with this one. 5-inch air grinder, I don't ever use this very frequently, and I actually drug this out of a for sale pile and used it on this project. And again, I just don't like this tool. It uses a lot of air. It's hard on my compressor. You don't have a lot of room with this surface area at the sanding disc. It's good and aggressive, but not really that important for the job. These two tools here, they're pretty much the same thing, just normal die grinders. I got one with a 3-inch and one with a 2-inch pad. Again, both 24 grits. Really, the only one that is really helpful is the 3-inch. The 2-inch is nice because it gets in a little bit smaller areas, but it's not that big of a difference versus the 3-inch. And lastly, I have my 6-inch DA, again with 24 grit. This helps smooth things over, but does not remove much material. So for you guys at home, if you're about to take this project on yourselves, really, I would focus on a good 7-inch grinder that you can slow the speed down on. Possibly these 4.5 or 5-inch grinders, and a decent die grinder with a 3-inch disc. Those tools there will get this job done. So hopefully you guys find this helpful when selecting the grinders that you're going to be using on your project. All right guys, that's going to be it for this video. Please keep an eye on the channel. The next video I'll be making, we're going to be installing the wood for the transom, making forward progress in the boat finally. So if you haven't already, subscribe, turn on the notifications. As always, hit the like button, comment on the video, let me know your thoughts, and thank you very much for watching.